There seems to be a little bit of smoke around the Royals and Brent Rooker. Does a reunion make sense? And what would the Royals have to give up to go out there and get the slugging outfielder? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And as always, you can always find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That's Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. For you first-time listeners out there, if you're wondering about this show and maybe more so about me, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, some post-game Chiefs stuff, and some producing as well. So I stay pretty busy in the day-to-day when it comes to sports. But when it comes to this podcast, you know that you are going to get 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. We're now just a week away from the trade deadline, and things are going to start heating up. In fact, I imagine they're going to heat up before this week actually closes on Sunday, and maybe the Royals will be one of those teams that makes a move. It's also not going to surprise me if the Royals wait up until the buzzer to make a move next week when the deadline officially wraps up all the trades that could be happening among buying teams and maybe some selling teams that go all the way up until the final horn sounds to unload some of their top players and get prospects in return. But unlike many years in which the Royals were those sellers, it appears they're going to be buying. And as was talked about yesterday on our podcast, as was reported by Jeff Passan, at the moment, it feels like the Royals are one of the more aggressive teams out there in trying to upgrade their roster that now sits 10 games over 500. As they gear up for a rubber match tonight against the Arizona Diamondbacks. I will be out there getting some audio post-game, giving live updates, all that fun and wonderful stuff. So you can follow me on there once the game begins at 7:10. But this morning, I think I've been probably doing the same routine over and over again when it comes to trade deadline news. When I get into work, do some digging, do some researching, go to multiple news outlets, see if there's any new article that comes out about the deadline, projections, what's been said among front offices. And going back to Sunday, I think it was, started seeing more and more possibilities of Brent Rooker, former Royal, of course, played 14 games for the club in 2022. But Brent Rooker being linked to Kansas City in a trade. And that caught me off guard because my prediction, I can't remember if I said it on this podcast or maybe over the airwaves on 810, but I thought Brent Rooker would be a Philadelphia Philly. I thought it was a really good fit. I thought the Phillies would give up enough for him to go out there and get him, and that still may be the case, right? That still may be a very likely destination for the Oakland Athletic Slugger. But the Royals, I think, are absolutely in the running. I think the Royals are in the running for a few guys. And in fact, the three that I think are giving off the most interest, I think the three that have the most smoke around them is Brent Rooker, Tommy Pham, and Jazz Chisholm. I think those are the three hitters that make a lot of sense and that we've heard a lot about. I don't know how deep into their system the Royals will go, but I do have an idea of what some of those players are going to cost. And this today, of course, this first segment is just about Brent Rooker. It's not about Jazz Chisholm. Maybe we'll dive into Jazz Chisholm tomorrow if that makes sense for the Royals. And we've already done a podcast episode on Tommy Pham. Brent Rooker, though, I don't know if it's the exact need the Royals are looking for. He's not a leadoff hitter. He doesn't really play the field, but he would become one of the best hitters in this lineup. In fact, he would become the second best hitter in this lineup behind Bobby Witt Jr. I mean, it gives Salvador Perez more protection. It gives Vinny Pasquantino more protection. It gives Hunter Renfroe more protection. And I do think if the Royals go out there and acquire him, it does make sense from what J.J. Picollo was saying about going for guys that not only better this team, but better next year's squad, the year after that. Brent Rooker's got years of control. He's got multiple years of control at that. So it's going to cost you a little bit more. If you thought that Hunter Harvey and his years of control, his 1 year of control was very expensive by giving up Caden Wallace and a draft pick, I can tell you that Brent Rooker in the season that he's having with his years of control is going to cost a lot. I don't think the Royals could work out a deal that does not involve either Blake Mitchell, Carter Jensen, or Ramon Ramirez. There's 3 catchers right there. I think one of them would absolutely be included in that deal. I also think one of your top pitchers would have to be included in a Ben Kudrna, a Blake Walters, a Frank Mozzicato. One of those guys, I think, would have to be included in that deal. And then maybe it would be a major league guy you have, or maybe it would be a throw-in like a Nick Prado. That still feels like that wouldn't get the job done. It might just be 3 prospects. It might be something like Carter Jensen, Ben Kudrna, though that feels unlikely because they just promoted him. Maybe it would be Blake Mitchell. Maybe it would be Blake Mitchell and it would be Blake Walters or a Hero Wyatt. And then you throw in somebody like a Gavin Cross as well. That would take a big hit, a big chunk out of the Royals farm system, but you aren't just paying for 50 to 60 games of Brent Rooker. You're paying for the rest of this year, next year, and maybe the year after that of Brent Rooker. I go back many a times to what J.J. Picollo has said in the weeks, the months leading up to the deadline, and what he appears to be looking for. Brent Rooker, as I just mentioned, he's not that puzzle piece that fits exactly, that has that satisfactory feel to it. I think he makes this lineup better. I think he also is missing a lot of the attributes that the Royals look for in their players. He would not lead off. He does not play the field. And that just goes against what the Royals have been doing all year long with their DH spot. Like even with Tommy Pham plays the field. Brent Rooker can and Tommy Pham can, but I think it would be easier to rotate Tommy Pham around than it would be for Brent Rooker. And Tommy Pham would be cheaper. But I'm not diving into that. I think that Brent Rooker and Jazz Chisholm would kind of garner the same amount of prospects. They would have that type of attention around them where you got to go above and beyond if you're the Royals farm system. And not to mention, the Royals want to add a bullpen arm. So how much can you give up in a deal for a Brent Rooker or a Jazz Chisholm and still have enough to go out there and get a bullpen arm? And that's going to scare away a lot of people listening. I've already had multiple people today comment on some of my posts on Twitter saying, I don't want Brent Rooker. I don't think he's a good fit, and maybe you are looking more so at another player. What I've come to figure out with the options the Royals are looking at, there is not one guy out there that 100% of the people want. I think the most popular choice is Jazz Chisholm because a lot of people like the player. They like the swagger. They think he would fit well at the top of the order, and he's not Tommy Pham, who has a lot of controversy among fans around him where he can be a little bit hot-headed. Like Jazz Chisholm, to me, is the one guy a lot of Royals fans would really want. And I still think that's a possibility. I don't know how expensive he will be because he's younger than Brent Rooker. But as I said with Brent Rooker, I can give an estimate. I can give a guess at what I think it will take for a farm system that's bottom 5 in baseball. When you have those extra years of control attached to them and they're not making a lot of money right now, i.e. Brent Rooker, i.e. Jazz Chisholm, i.e. Tommy Pham, minus the years of control, you are going to have to give up guys that are number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 in your farm system. I think the benefit of where the Royals are at and being a little bit more aggressive, I don't view it as a do or die scenario, right? When you think about all in, putting your chips in, to me, I think Baltimore could go all in. Baltimore getting a Tarek Skubal or a Garrett Crochet would have to part ways with a Jackson Holiday or a Kobe Mayo, right? Or a Heston Kierstad. I mean, you're having to dip into your farm system. I know Kierstad has been up and back between AAA Norfolk and Baltimore, but that's going all in, a system that is loaded and you empty that system, that's do or die. That's putting all your chips in one basket to go out there and get somebody. It also comes down to being a rental. I don't view it as being do or die if you acquire a player that's got years of control. If the Royals give up Blake Mitchell and Ben Kudrna to go get Brent Rooker or Jazz Chisholm, well, you are going to have that player for a couple of years. It doesn't mean you are selling your soul to go and win a championship in 2024. It's trying to better your team for now and better your team for the future. The Royals are trying to capitalize on a window they believe is just opening up. And I also leave everybody with this. The Royals have 3 catchers in their system. I had already named them off that I think they're going to have to make a choice on here sooner rather than later. And in fact, in the next week, they have to make a decision. Who is the catcher of the future? Who is the catcher to replace Salvador Perez? Is it Blake Mitchell? Is it Carter Jensen? Or is it Ramon Ramirez? I think you can pick 2 to work with, but the other one has to go. I think that Ramon Ramirez, being a lottery ticket guy, might be the odd man out because Carter Jensen just got promoted and Blake Mitchell's having a pretty damn good rookie season at the professional level. But that, to me, is where you're looking to trade. If you're going to give up a prospect, one of those 3 feel like they're on the way. And if it's Brent Rooker, it's Jazz Chisholm, it's Tommy Pham, it's Yimi Garcia, it's Tanner Scott, it's Carlos Estevez, pick a name out there, you're going to have to part ways with one of them. And if you have a lot of depth at one position, that's what I think I would be offering up. And my guess is JJ Picollo is trying to offer up maybe one of those guys in a deal to maybe sweeten the deal of bringing in a guy that would significantly improve this 2024 lineup. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I'm going to tell you why Kris Bubic is going to stay in the bullpen and not get moved into the number 5 spot in the rotation, subbing out Alec Marsh. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Few sponsors I want to give a shout out to, starting with our title sponsor in Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, I'm talking about your rival cities. And with hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your rival cities. And I told you yesterday, San Diego is a place I'm going to be traveling to next month. Going to be going back down to Dallas, Texas, not too long from now because I got family down there. And then next year, I'm actually already started looking into flights and hotels going to Las Vegas for a bachelor trip. So you guessed it, I'm going to be going over to Booking.com to make sure I find the right place to stay. They always are going to have you taken care of. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this season. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com, on the site, or on the Booking.com app. I also want to give a shout-out to PrizePicks. And with PrizePicks, it's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. And you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. And you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has also got you covered every week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to helping your lineup hit or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. I thought it was interesting that Kris Bubic so quickly into his return to Kansas City was thrust into a high leverage role, or at least pitching in some roles that, you know, I didn't think would be possible until August or September. And I also didn't know how good he was going to look early into his return. I thought there would be some bumps and bruises along the way. I thought he would get roughed up in an outing or two, or maybe he was going to be used in long relief and the velo would be down. I mean, you're building the arm back up. But even going back to when I was in Surprise for spring training, and we spoke with Matt Quatraro, we spoke with JJ Picollo, and how they were going to handle Kris Bubic. And they brought up being very patient, being very careful, not wanting to rush him many a times. And the multiple days that we were down there and we spoke with those guys, they never gave off this feeling or this vibe of he's close, he's ready to go, and we want him to be up in the big leagues as soon as possible. It was always a target date of June or July, and I think they were pretty accurate in that. Kris Bubic slowly worked his way back. I thought he overstayed in Omaha, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because he was pitching very well. They moved him to the bullpen, and then he got his shot in Kansas City. And in Kansas City, he's done nothing but absolutely dominate. The numbers, not just the eye test numbers, but the deep dive numbers make you believe that this is not just a guy that's getting lucky and he's got 6 scoreless innings and, it's only 6 innings. I get it's a small sample size, but I also believe there's some numbers here that you seriously have to dive into because it shows you that Kris Bubic might be more valuable to this team out of the bullpen than he would be as a starter, and trying to lengthen him out as a starter after they already moved him back to the bullpen in Omaha, and he's been throwing in the bullpen and succeeding at that. I don't think you need to force the issue there. But with Kris Bubic here are some fascinating things comparing his last year, which was only about 16 innings, his average velocity on the fastball, the average fastball spin rate, and same thing with the slider here. So his fastball in 2023, before he got injured, had Tommy John and missed the rest of the year, he was averaging 91.7 miles an hour with his four-seam. This year, in the 6 innings that he's thrown, that's now sitting at 93.9, so a 2.2 jump in his average velocity for a fastball. You look at the spin rate. Last year, it was 2,176, so a little over 2,100. This year, it's nearly 2,400, 2,391. Now, for the slider, this to me, the new pitch he developed last year and why we saw that improvement from Kris Bubic, it was 83.6. This year, it's 85.1. So a pretty firm slider he's got, and he's throwing almost 30% of the time. The slider spin rate is what's jaw-dropping. I think you can look at the average between 2,200 and 2,300. Well, last year, a brand new pitch, a little bit below average. It was 2,109. So, again, slightly over 2,100. The slider spin rate this year is almost 2,700, 2,684. You dive into some of these other numbers. If you're going, it's 6 innings, last night he gave up the triple and then he was able to dance his way out of danger. I'm not overly impressed just yet. He hasn't thrown in the highest of leverage rolls, and I agree with that. His only high leverage roll was against St. Louis, but I was amazed at how quickly they put him in a spot like that. But here's some of the even deeper dive numbers. His expected ERA is 1.87. He's not unlucky by any means. He is exactly what his ERA shows. He hasn't given up a run this yet, but it's still at 1.87, damn good. His expected batting average when facing an opponent, 186. Very, very good. His average exit velocity, when a hitter is facing him, of course, 87.3. His chase rate, 39.4. That is near the 99th percentile. His whiff rate, 36.2, nearing the 95th percentile. His strikeout rate, 35%. A 35% K rate is near the 99th percentile. His walk rate is 5%, almost to the 90th percentile. His barrel percentage, 0.0. Nobody has squared Kris Bubic up yet. 99th percentile. Hard hit rate, 33.3, almost the 95th percentile. All of those numbers tell you things right now are playing out well as a reliever. And I understand fans get frustrated with Alec Marsh. He's been bad since the Yankees outing. And, I want Kris Bubic to replace him because he's looked so good. I look at it the opposite way. The bullpen needs a lot more help than the rotation does. And if Kris Bubic can be that quote-unquote acquisition or one of those acquisitions, I think you've hit a home run there. Because Kris Bubic is showing a version of himself that he's never shown before. The spin rate that he has on his fastball and his slider are in the elite categories. And that is going to play. That is an excellent find. That is better than what you could have hoped for coming off Tommy John. And that's another part of it. I want Kris Bubic to start next year. There's no need to rush him this year. he can be a good piece and a valuable piece to this bullpen. And that's where I think he needs to be right now. I think you flip a coin for Alec Marsh every fifth day. With Kris Bubic, I want him to be out there in the seventh inning, in the eighth inning, high leverage roles. And with the way he's been throwing, I want to keep him in that spot. All right, before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, I'm going to tell you why it's all right to part ways with prospects, even good ones, if you're going to be a buyer at the deadline. That's next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor today in Game Time. And if you're thinking about going out to the game tonight, I'll be there working. But if you're wanting to go and enjoy it with the family, enjoy it with a friend, or you want to go by yourself, go buy your tickets over at Game Time. It is the best place to go when you're buying tickets, and it doesn't have to be just a baseball game. It could be a concert. It could be a comedy show. It could be a football game, basketball game. I know those are more sporting games, but still, it doesn't really matter what you're buying. Just go buy them over at Game Time. They show you the best deals, whether you're going by yourself, you're going with multiple people, going with a friend, parents, grandparents, girlfriend, boyfriend. Again, it just doesn't matter. They show you the best possible deals over at Game Time. So here's what you need to do. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Well, this day, I could say as well, that's how I got the tongue twister there, has really shown us that the Royals intend to be buyers. And as I have sifted through the responses to some of my shows, responses to some of my tweets, all that stuff, I can get this sense that there is a fear of the Royals giving up top prospects for a guy, and that guy doesn't work out, or the Royals don't make it to the postseason, and now that prospect becomes a star, or that prospect becomes a megastar, and you feel terrible in trading him. And I think that in baseball, we just think, if you trade a guy to a certain spot and they don't win the World Series, the failure of a trade. Like, for example, last year, there could be an argument made that with the Royals trading Scott Barlow to the Padres and the Padres not winning the World Series and giving up prospects to the Royals, well, the Royals won that trade, right? Because the Padres were going all in, they acquired a reliever, and he's not on their team anymore. I don't believe it to be the case. If you get good value and you try to go over the top and you give your team a chance and it doesn't work out, I don't consider it to be a failure. And I think the Royals are trying to be careful with who they acquire and what could be deemed a failure and what can be deemed a success. They're trying to get guys with extra years of control so that it's not all of your chips in one basket for 1 year. You could evaluate this trade 2 to 3 years down the road, depending on what the Royals do. And I look at it this way. If the Royals acquire Brent Rooker or Jazz Chisholm and they make the playoffs this year, don't win the World Series, but they make the playoffs. And next year, they make the playoffs again, but don't win the World Series. I wouldn't see that trade as a failure. I really wouldn't. I would look at it as that player got them over the edge and back into the playoffs this year and kept their team competitive enough, or was another piece to keep them competitive for next year. And I think so many times we fell in love with prospects in the Royals system because you want those guys to succeed or you hear good things about them. But I've gone back over the years. I go back to 2018 and I hear about top 100s and I hear about great prospects and how those prospects need to be hung on to and they should be developed because they're going to be a big time piece. I think that can happen. But I also think prospects are so hard to judge. You really don't know what they're going to be like. Remember how good Jackson Kowar was in AAA before he was called up? He was like the minor league pitcher of the year. He had the best stuff. He was throwing 98, 99 and had this devastating changeup. Never could figure it out at the big league level. Daniel Lynch was good in the minor leagues. Never really could figure it out at the big league level. You look at somebody, for example, like a and MJ Melendez. MJ Melendez still has his issues and his struggles at the plate. But, he is a big leaguer, but still the expectations for him coming up from the minor leagues was a big-time power hitter that could transform the lineup. Nick Pratto, same thing. Drew Waters, same thing. Some of these top 100 guys were given the pressure of, you're going to be really good, and you're going to be the anchor for our rotation or for our lineup, and it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it does. You think the Rangers thought Cole Reagans was going to be what he became? No, otherwise they wouldn't have traded him, right? That's just baseball. And prospects are so difficult to gauge. Draft prospects are difficult to gauge. And it's why the Royals are in a spot right now where they need to be brutally honest with themselves. If you trade Blake Mitchell, or you trade Ben Kudrna, or you trade Blake Walters or Gavin Cross, you have to be confident you can create another or draft another. And that's why, if you trade Frank Mozzicato, I see David Shields, the second-round pick, being another Frank Mozzicato or better, hopefully better than what Frank Mozzicato has been. But if he's included in a trade, I believe the Royals think they can create another or a better one at that. If they trade Gavin Cross, they feel like they can have a better hitter, Jack Caglione. If they trade Blake Mitchell, I think it means they think Carter Jensen will be a better big leaguer. Or if they trade Carter Jensen, they're putting more chips in Blake Mitchell's basket. So all of those things together, I think, show you prospects are tough to judge. They really are. Look at Whit Merrifield. Whit Merrifield was never really a top 100, a big-time prospect, yet was really good in Kansas City for a number of years. And whether you like him or not, that's the reality of it. He was a college pick. He was a later-round pick. He spent a lot of years in the minors and then flourished when he got to Kansas City. Freddie Fermin's another one. Was never a huge top prospect. He was a journeyman, and now you saw what he was able to do. It's why you have to be A, great at drafting talent, B, developing talent, and C, knowing when to either call up or move that talent. And with the Royals being a bottom 5 farm system, I think my opinion has changed, and I'm not sure there is anybody in the system they need to clutch and say there's no way in hell we're trading that player. I don't think they need to take that approach, because until Jack Caglione, they don't have a top 100. They don't have a top 100 guy. I like Blake Mitchell a lot. I really do. He would be somebody that I would hesitate to give up, but if the move made a lot of sense to better this team for now and to the future, I would seriously think about it. Because can I tell you right now, Blake Mitchell and his numbers in low A are going to translate to the big leagues 3 years from now. Can I tell you that honestly? I really can't. I can't. I don't know. I can't tell you what a guy is going to be at 18 and then what he's going to be at 23 or 24. It's very few guys the Royals have ever had that you could see them at 18 years old and go, that's a superstar. Really, it was Bobby Witt Jr. for me and nobody else in the last 10 to 15 years that I look at and say, he's going to be a can't-miss guy. Even Alex Gordon had so much pressure on him, and I think he lived up to a lot of that pressure, but they also said he was going to be the next George Brett. He was not the next George Brett. He was a really good baseball player, and I think lived up to a lot of hype, but you just never know. Luke Hochevar, another one. Now, I know we're talking about draft prospects. He was supposed to be the front-end guy, the number one, the 1-1, the 200 innings guy. That's the thing with prospects. You never really know what they are going to be. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Tomorrow, we're going to dive a little bit more into some more trade deadline prospects out there. And if there's any more smoke, again, we're going to continue doing this up until the deadline. If there's any more smoke around the Royals and another player, and likely recap what happened tonight between the Royals and the Diamondbacks. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.